And this is what is terrifying the party machines of the official parties. John.
Well, the big question, Paul, is it terrifying the markets? I mean, if the yes do win or even get close, what will the markets do?
Look, if it's 51-49 to no, and this movement carries on, the markets will ask, how long till it comes back? You can see the grassroots energy. And so the important thing, all the stacking up of cash, all the words to calm people down, if it's very close, this is why the markets will go on worrying, John.
Voters in Scotland may choose to embark on the biggest constitutional shake-up the country has seen for more than 300 years. A yes vote in September's independence referendum would of course be momentous for Scotland. But what effect would it have on the rest of the UK, on the remaining rump? Our political editor Gary Gibbon has been finding out.
We choose a different way.
The celebrations would be ecstatic. A late surge delivers victory for the Yes campaign. It's the morning of 19th September, the day after the poll, and Scotland has gone for Alec Salmon's vision. Leaving the United Kingdom, a separate state is born north of the border.
Well, we know what this country would call itself after independence. The country it leaves behind, we don't even know what that would be called. We don't know how the remainder of the United Kingdom would perform in the negotiations over the treaty after separation. We don't know whether it would hold together as a country. Would other bits drop off? Would it be a poorer country? Would it be a more right-wing country? And how would the rest of the world look at it after Scotland had left?
We'd find ourselves weakened in the IMF. We'd find ourselves weakened in the G8, the G20, in every international gathering that there is.
Many agree separation could be a high-speed relegation to a lower world league. And a senior Foreign Office source said it would be the most momentous, damaging blow to the remainder UK standing since Suez and the loss of empire. And a new chapter could open in the politics of the remainder state. And if an independent Scotland tried to lure investment over the border, would there be economic pain for the north of England?
I certainly think that independence would be a very bad thing for the north of England.
Because the Scots would compete very strongly, ruthlessly for business, disadvantaging the north?
Well, I wouldn't say ruthlessly, but I think they'd be better able to manage their corner than the north could be.
And would Scotland be the last bit of the old UK to drop off, or could it start a trend? Welsh nationalists would relish the precedent. For some in Northern Ireland, darker thoughts stir.
Are you saying you think Scottish independence could mean the unravelling of the Good Friday Agreement?
I think it would potentially could unravel. It will be the unpicking of it. It will certainly send a signal to those people who wish to unravel it. This is possible. But we just need a signal like that and some other unacceptable violence which the dissident Republicans are engaged in to start to demonstrate to certain elements that this can be unravelled and untied. That would be disastrous for us all.
And who would come out on top in the treaty negotiations that would follow a yes vote? David Cameron insists no one's even preparing for them in London. Pro-independence campaigners have been sharpening their opening bids for a long time.
The land border between Scotland and England isn't really disputed. On the northeast coast, it runs along this fence. What is disputed is the maritime border. In the late 90s, the government in London decided to redraw it. It used to run due east from this fence. They decided to curve it out 60 miles to the north, taking in a few oil wells on the way.
Two legal experts recently predicted a dispute over the maritime border could run for up to 10 years. The man who was in charge of devolution in Whitehall thinks a yes vote in Scotland would long since have claimed a mighty Westminster scalp.
I wouldn't want to be the Prime Minister or the government that had lost Scotland.
You're out the door, potentially.
Oh yes, yes.
While a fierce daily referendum battle absorbs Scotland, it's a faraway noise in large parts of the rest of the UK. But it could have mighty consequences beyond its own borders if Scotland votes yes in September.
Here it is, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but now facing its biggest shake-up, potentially, since Southern Ireland went its own way in 1922. If Scotland were to leave, just for starters, the UK would literally shrink. It would lose a third of its landmass, not to mention all those beautiful lochs and mountains. Its population would drop by 8%, and around $239 billion, or 9% of its GDP, would disappear. Scotland leaving could also affect Britain's standing in the world. Would it still deserve a permanent seat in the UN Security Council? Would it still have the same clout at the EU? Among the problematic items, Britain's Scottish-based submarine-borne nuclear deterrent, the rest of the armed forces, and here are just a few of the bases, the oil and gas, and, well, the list is endless. As to the essence of the argument for independence, put simply, it's that surely Scotland would be best governed by the people who live there and its parliament. At Westminster, all the mainstream parties want Scotland to stay and have been busily telling the Scots how much they're loved, while also warning them they'd be poorer and their future place in the world more uncertain if they vote for independence. And talking of voting, who's eligible? Well, anyone over 16 who lives in Scotland, so about 4 million people. And turnout is expected to be high.
Things are a wee bit nervous across the Atlantic tonight because Scotland may be about to do something we here in the colonies did a while back, declare independence from Great Britain. There's a lot at stake, and the polling remains neck and neck, which means the United Kingdom, which we all came to learn as England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland, may not be so united after all. Our report tonight from NBC's Kelly Kobiea in Edinburgh.
Scotland, land of bagpipes and Braveheart.
But they'll never take our freedom!
Now in another epic battle over its future, to leave the United Kingdom or not. With polls saying it's too close to call, British politicians have resorted to begging.
We want you to stay. Head, heart and soul, we want you to stay.
The Scottish flag was even raised over 10 Downing Street. That didn't go well. You might think of Scotland as independent, but it's not. It's been part of Great Britain for centuries. And many people here say it's been too long. They're tired of taking orders from a central government far away. But what would a split really mean? Would the Union Jack lose its Scottish blue? Would Scotland still pay its bills with a British pound? And what about all the UK oil pumped from Scottish waters? Or the UK's nuclear arsenal on submarines based in Scotland? Big banks are threatening to move if Scotland breaks away. Even the Queen, who has a castle in Scotland, weighed in this weekend, saying, "I hope people will think very carefully about the future." Derek Gribben runs his own business. He says his yes vote is for his daughters.
I just feel we give too much money to a country, or sorry, to a government that just doesn't look after us.
I'm glad that you're mentioning ballot boxes being opened, though. We know that during the campaign we've had that. We've had postal votes. Postal votes are going to be enormously important in this campaign. About 18% of the vote is going to come out of postal ballots. But there's people in the room that have been sampling those ballot boxes as they've been opened, and they've been taking tallies, and the reports have been very positive for us.
It's important to remember that probably about a fifth of the electorate, and that'll be a quarter of the total turnout. A quarter of the total turnout have voted already. They've voted by postal votes, and those postal votes are running very strongly towards no. So there's a whole bank of votes in.
So they did not then set it up in the way that a proper constitutional referendum would have been set up. According to international standards, to begin with, the people who would be voting in that referendum would be people who had a stake in the future of the nation, whose future they were voting on. We had every boy and his dog able to vote.
So people who hadn't been in Scotland for, more than maybe a few months, basically all these people had a vote on the future of Scotland as an independent nation, which is, if you just think about it, think how absurd that is. People with no stake. Now, had that been serious, a real referendum that we were going to be allowed to have a chance of winning, they would have applied international standards. They would have used something like the New Caledonia franchise. which is a really solid and it doesn't exclude people who've moved into Scotland. It isn't just ethnic Scots. It's, you know, it's people who have a genuine stake interest in the future of that nation. That franchise, it shouldn't be a local council franchise. It should be one that reflects the stakeholders. Who are the real stakeholders? And that's what that needs to be. That it wasn't should have told us everything. Then we had the Edinburgh Agreement. And the Edinburgh Agreement said that there was a purdah period during which no new policies were to be announced. There was no, you know, that all the campaigning would go on and then it stops. You can rehearse the arguments and everything that's been put forward, but nothing new should be introduced. Well, we got the vow, Devo Max, less than 2 days before the vote. If you vote no, you will get this. Of course, that did not deliver, but it completely breached the Edinburgh Agreement. What they said after was, well, there's no evidence that it altered people's minds. Of course it did. Of course it told people, well, if you don't want to go all the way to independence, we could have, I think Gordon Brown said it would be almost a federal relationship, you know, with blah, blah, blah. And that meant people could say, well, if we're afraid of what will happen, afraid of being pulled out of the European Union, we'd like a lot more power, but we're not sure about a total break. Well, of course, then they voted no. Then you also had the media. And in a properly run referendum, according to international rules, you make sure it's 50-50, that people get both sides of the argument absolutely equally. You know, there was a full study done, and it took one guy, a Glasgow University lecturer in particular, to go through everything and come back and say, look, it was over 70% no media coverage. And that also breaches international standards. So we didn't have any possibility of a fair referendum. And that wasn't coincidental. And had there been any kind of vote tampering, say with the postal vote, because it was only consultative and there was no actual, therefore, fraud, it makes it nearly impossible to get a judicial review. And there is no way, no matter what they have said, no matter what they have told us, get a majority of members elected to Westminster and that you don't need a referendum, or if Scotland wants to leave, then it has the right to do so. No matter what the British state has said, that was never true.